For more than 2 decades, the electromagnetic railgun occupied a strange place in naval development. Always futuristic, always promising, and always just a few breakthroughs away from transforming surface combatants. The idea of firing a small, inert metal projectile at hypersonic speed using electricity rather than explosives appealed deeply to navies facing rising cost of ammunition, shrinking magazines, and vulnerability to catastrophic explosions aboard ships. Yet, after billions of dollars and years of testing, the railgun has quietly faded away from naval planning before reappearing in the Trump-class warship design for the US Navy. The overall trend decline is not a single technical failure, but a growing realization that railguns solve fewer problems than originally hoped, while introducing many new ones. At its core, a railgun is an electromagnetic launcher. Instead of using chemical propellant to push a shell down a barrel, a railgun uses electrical current. 2 parallel conductive rails form the barrel. A conductive sabot bridges the rails and completes an electrical circuit. When a very large current flows through this loop, it generates a magnetic field. The interaction between the current and the magnetic field produces a powerful force that accelerates the projectile along the rails and out of the barrel. Because the acceleration depends on electrical power rather than expanding gas, a railgun can theoretically achieve much higher muzzle velocities than conventional guns. In practical military designs, naval railguns aim for muzzle velocities between roughly 2,000 and 3,500 meters per second. At these speeds, even a small projectile carries enormous kinetic energy. There is no explosive warhead. Damage is inflicted purely by velocity. A dense metal projectile impacting at several kilometers per second can defeat hardened targets, shatter structures, or destroy missiles through pure kinetic energy. In theory, this allows a ship to strike land targets, enemy vessels, or incoming threats using inexpensive, compact ammunition. The design of a military railgun, however, is far more complex than the basic concept suggests. A shipboard railgun requires massive amounts of electrical power used over a few milliseconds. This energy must be stored, conditioned, and released precisely, usually using large capacitor banks. The rails themselves must withstand extreme electromagnetic forces that try to push them apart, as well as intense heat and erosion caused by current flow and friction. The projectile must survive acceleration forces tens of thousands of times greater than gravity, while remaining aerodynamically stable in flight. Every firing cycle imposes enormous mechanical and thermal stress on the system. Despite these challenges, navies were initially enthusiastic. Railguns promised several attractive advantages. They offered much longer range than conventional naval guns, potentially exceeding 150 kilometers. They eliminated explosive propellants and warheads, reducing the risk of catastrophic onboard detonations. The projectiles themselves could be cheaper than guided missiles, allowing ships to strike over-the-horizon targets in a low-cost way and with greater magazine depth. Railguns also appeared well-suited to missile defense, where speed and reaction time matter more than explosive yield. A fast, solid projectile could theoretically intercept cruise missiles, aircraft, or even ballistic missiles at a fraction of the cost of a missile interceptor. No navy pursued this vision more seriously than the United States Navy. Formal work on naval railguns began in the mid-2000s, led by the Office of Naval Research. Over the next decade and a half, the Navy funded multiple prototypes, primarily from BAE Systems and General Atomics. These guns demonstrated progressively higher energies, culminating in test shots exceeding 30 megajoules and projectile velocities around Mach 7 to Mach 10 in land-based testing. By the early 2010s, the Navy openly discussed railguns as future shipboard weapons capable of engaging surface targets, aircraft, and incoming missiles. At the same time, the Navy invested heavily in the supporting infrastructure. This included research into hypervelocity projectiles, advanced power storage, and projectile guidance systems capable of surviving extreme launch conditions. The Zumwalt-class destroyers, with their integrated electric propulsion systems, were often cited as ideal railgun hosts. At one point, the Navy even suggested that railguns could replace or supplement missiles for certain missions, reshaping naval firepower economics. Yet, as the program matured, its limitations became impossible to ignore. Rail erosion remained severe, leading to the fast depletion of expensive gun barrels. Even optimistic claims of hundreds of shots per barrel did not clarify how many were full-power firings, nor whether accuracy and safety could be maintained over operational lifetimes. Rate of fire was constrained by heat buildup and power recharge times, undermining missile defense roles that require a high rate of fire and sustained engagement. Guidance proved exceptionally difficult. Electronics had to survive extreme acceleration, electromagnetic interference, plasma formation in the barrel, and intense heating, all within a very small projectile volume. Power integration emerged as a decisive problem. Most existing surface combatants simply do not have spare electrical capacity to operate a railgun at useful performance levels. Even ships with large generators would need significant internal rearrangements to accommodate energy storage, cooling systems, and structural reinforcement. In practice, installing a railgun would often require removing existing weapons or sensors, creating trade-offs rather than net gains. By the late 2010s, progress slowed and public updates became scarce. The Navy moved railgun testing from its longtime center at Dahlgren to the White Sands Missile Range. Planned at-sea tests were repeatedly delayed. Meanwhile, the strategic context changed. Hypersonic missiles advanced rapidly, at least outside the United States, offering long-range strike and penetration capabilities that railguns could not match. Missile defense priorities shifted towards layered systems, combining active, electronically scanned radar, advanced interceptors, and directed energy weapons. In its fiscal year 2022 budget request, the Navy effectively ended the railgun program by requesting no further research funding. Official statements emphasized preserving knowledge and hardware for possible future use. But the message was clear. Railguns would not become operational naval weapons in the foreseeable future. After roughly 16 years and around $500 million, the program had reached its practical limit. Other navies have explored railguns, but none have demonstrated a clear path to operational deployment. China attracted attention in the late 2010s when images appeared of a large electromagnetic gun mounted on a landing ship for testing. This sparked speculation that China was leapfrogging US efforts. However, no evidence has emerged of a deployable naval railgun entering service. Like the US program, Chinese testing appears focused on experimental validation rather than near-term weaponization. Japan's approach has been more cautious and technically grounded. Its research has focused on smaller caliber railguns, emphasizing rail durability and repeatable firing rather than extreme energy. In 2023, Japan conducted what it's described as the first shipboard firing test of a railgun. In September 2025, Japan conducted the successful firing of a shipborne railgun at an actual target's vessel. The target ship was moving during some of the test shots, although under tow behind another ship rather than its own power. Even so, Japanese efforts remain firmly in the research phase, aimed primarily at understanding electromagnetic launch physics and counter-hypersonic defense concepts, not fielding a fleet weapon in the near term. The deeper issue is that railguns increasingly lack a clear operational niche. As land attack weapons, they're basically outperformed by cruise missiles, which offer greater range, precision, and flexibility in terms of launch platform. Missiles can approach targets from multiple directions, can be rerouted in flight, fly complex trajectories, and strike hundreds or thousands of kilometers away in some cases. Railguns, by contrast, are line-of-sight weapons limited by ballistic trajectories and atmospheric drag. As surface warfare tools, railguns offer limited advantages over existing anti-ship missiles, which already combine high speed, active radar guidance, and large warheads. The kinetic impact of a railgun projectile is impressive, but it cannot match the terminal effect or the reach of modern anti-ship missiles. Against heavily defended and moving targets, such as a warship at a distance, unguided or minimally guided projectiles face steep odds. Missile defense was once the railgun's strongest selling point, but even here, its advantages have eroded. Intercepting a fast maneuvering missile with an unguided projectile requires either extremely high rates of fire or advanced guidance, both of which strain railgun design. Modern interceptor missiles, while expensive, offer far higher single-shot probability of kill, while railguns can, in theory, offer interception at a lower cost. Do you really want to risk a billion-dollar warship just to save a few bucks? Most navies prefer to use more expensive but more reliable missile interceptors with more reliable track record against major threats. Directed energy weapons, such as high-power lasers, now appear better suited for close-range defense against drones and small threats, with fewer logistical burdens. Perhaps most importantly, many of the railgun's promised benefits have been partially realized through other means. Hypervelocity projectiles, originally developed for railguns, can be fired from conventional naval guns and artillery. While slower than railgun-launched rounds, they still offer improved range, speed, and kinetic effect compared to traditional shells, without requiring new launchers or massive power systems. Existing 127mm naval guns and 155mm artillery can thus gain some railgun-like performance at far lower cost and risk. Modern naval warfare increasingly favors systems integration over single revolutionary weapons. Sensors, networks, missiles, and electronic warfare capabilities matter more than raw projectile speed. Now let's talk about the recent proposal by the US government to include a railgun on its new Trump-class battleship design. Putting a railgun on the proposed class of battleships raises serious questions about realism and opportunity cost. Naval railguns have spent 2 decades in development without overcoming fundamental problems: extreme rail wear, massive power and cooling demands, limited sustained rate of fire, and unresolved issues with projectile guidance. These are not marginal shortcomings, but structural barriers that led the US Navy itself to shelve the program after extensive testing. Betting a flagship combatant on a weapon that has never demonstrated actual viability risks repeating past acquisition failures, like the advanced gun systems on the Zumwalt-class destroyers. A far more credible approach would prioritize technologies already close to maturity and combat relevance. The conventional prompt strike missile offers proven long-range hypersonic strike capability with substantial deterrence value, while the Tomahawk Block 5 provides a flexible maritime strike and land attack capability. Focusing on these systems would maximize near-term combat power, rather than tying the class to what is essentially a speculative technology that history suggests may never be delivered. The railgun is not a failure in the scientific sense. It's demonstrated extraordinary engineering achievements and advanced understanding of electromagnetic launch principles. But as a shipboard weapon, it arrived too late, proved too demanding, and offered too little advantage over alternatives. For navies focused on reliability, flexibility, and combat effectiveness, railguns on ships are both impractical and unnecessary. If you've liked this video, please hit like and consider subscribing to my channel. See you next time.